Hello everyone. I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. She thought she was hitchhiking to a friend's party. Instead, she spent 7 years locked in a coffin-sized box, trained to believe she belonged to a sadistic couple. This isn't fiction. This is the story of Colleen Stan, the girl who was kept alive through fear, silence, and a wooden box beneath a bed. May 19th, 1977, Red Bluff, California. Colleen Stan stood on the side of the road, the spring sun sharp against the back of her neck. She adjusted the straps on her backpack and stuck out her thumb, smiling softly at the passing cars. She wasn't worried, not even a little. She'd hitchhiked plenty of times before. It was the 1970s, and the road was freedom. Colleen was 20 years old, a wanderer at heart, on her way to surprise a friend for a birthday party 400 miles away in Northern California. She'd already turned down 2 rides that felt off. She trusted her gut. She'd even let one guy pull over, peeked into his car, and politely declined. Then a blue Dodge Colt pulled over. Inside, a clean-cut man, Cameron Hooker, about 23, with a quiet, plain-looking wife in the passenger seat and a baby in the back. It felt safe, normal, like something her parents would approve of. She got in, and her life began to disappear. The first silence, the car ride started pleasantly. Cameron said very little. Janice, his wife, offered Colleen water and asked about her destination. The baby cried softly. Colleen smiled and offered to sing to her. They laughed, talked about the road. Then Cameron took an exit that didn't make sense. He claimed it was a shortcut. Colleen looked back at the child, asleep again in the rear seat, then back at Janice, who avoided her eyes. A pit opened in her stomach. But before she could speak, Cameron pulled over on a dirt road, turned off the ignition, and reached under the seat. The headbox. He moved fast. Out from under the seat, he pulled a strange, square wooden contraption with padding on the inside. Before Colleen could scream, Cameron placed it over her head, slamming it shut. The inside muffled all sound. She was thrown into instant darkness, with only the sound of her own breathing. She screamed. No one heard. Janice sat quietly in the front seat, not moving, not interfering. Colleen had no way of knowing that she'd just been captured by a man who had fantasized about this moment for years, and that Janice had agreed to help him. To the Hooker home for the next 3 hours, Colleen was bound, blindfolded, and driven to a beige house on Oak Street in Red Bluff. A normal house. Suburban. A place that could have belonged to anyone. Cameron carried her inside through the back entrance. He led her down a hall, through a door, into the basement. The air smelled like damp wood and sweat. Then he removed the headbox, and Colleen saw her new prison. The basement, there were no windows, just tools, clamps, wires. In the corner, a strange wooden box, shaped like a coffin, lined with carpet. It was exactly 6 feet long. Cameron smiled, the first real expression she'd seen on his face, and said, "This is where you live now." Colleen screamed. She begged. He just stared. She had no way of knowing he'd already built this box years ago, before ever meeting her. He'd tested it on Janice, who had once been a victim herself, until she became something else. The first night. He stripped her naked, chained her arms above her head, left her like that for 18 straight hours. He came back with food, fed her from a spoon, didn't speak. Then he put her in the box, bolted it shut, and left. The silence was complete. She could barely breathe. Her knees bent just enough to keep circulation. The walls pressed in around her. Her entire world had become 6 feet of darkness. And the worst part? She didn't know if he was coming back. The transformation days passed. Colleen was kept in the box for 23 hours a day. 1 hour to stretch, eat, relieve herself, and be tortured. Emotionally, sexually, physically. Cameron gave her a new name. K. Just K. He never referred to her as a person again. He told her she was owned by an organization called The Company, a powerful group that monitored slaves, punished escape, and could harm her family if she resisted. It was a lie. But Cameron was good at lies, and Colleen, terrified, isolated, and brainwashed, began to believe them. The letter home months later, Colleen was allowed to write a letter to her parents. He dictated what she should say, that she was traveling with friends, living in a commune, and that she'd call soon. Her parents were stunned, but not suspicious. Not yet. The 1970s were filled with stories of kids disappearing into communes, counterculture, and off-the-grid experiments. But nothing about Colleen's life now was spiritual. It was enslavement. She had been stolen, and everyone thought she was free by choice. The world keeps turning outside. Life went on. Gas prices rose. Disco died. Reagan took office. Inside the Hooker home, Colleen remained in her box. Cameron built a stretching rack for her. He tested devices, clamps, machines. He showed Janice what he did. Sometimes he made her watch. Other times, Janice held the camera. She never helped Colleen, but she'd eventually become the key to setting her free. 1 year later, Colleen was allowed to stand, supervised. Cameron gave her a slave contract, binding her to a lifetime of obedience. He made her sign it. He said the company now recognized her as an official slave. Colleen wept, not because it was true, but because she believed it was. The long game. This would continue for 7 years. 7 years of control, conditioning, and unimaginable psychological abuse. 7 years in a world where obedience became safety, where resistance could mean death, not for her, but for her family. And so she complied. Until one day, the same woman who helped capture her, Janice, would turn against her husband and bring the nightmare crashing down. Red Bluff, California, 1977. From the outside, the Hooker residence looked like any modest family home. A low roof, dull beige siding, a rusting basketball hoop over the garage. Neighbors waved, kids rode bikes past the sidewalk. It was the last place anyone would suspect a 20-year-old woman was being held in a coffin-sized box beneath a waterbed. But inside that house, Cameron Hooker was crafting a life of domination and delusion, while his wife Janice hovered in the blurred lines between victim, accomplice, and believer. Colleen's prison wasn't just physical, it was psychological, and it had only just begun. The cell beneath the bed. The box was precise, 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, padded inside with cheap insulation foam. Air holes were drilled into the sides. Carpet lined the interior, not for comfort, but to muffle sound. Cameron slid it beneath his and Janice's California King waterbed, the centerpiece of their bedroom. From above, the mattress sagged slightly, but no one noticed. He told Janice, "If she makes noise, ignore it. If you hear her crying, that's just part of the process." Colleen lay in silence for up to 23 hours per day, with just enough space to wiggle her feet and shift her hips. There was no light, no time, no hope. The wife's role. Janice Hooker was 24 years old when Colleen was taken. She had been raised in a strict religious household and met Cameron in her teens. He was controlling from the start, drawing her into a world of sadomasochistic sexual rituals and obedience games. Before Colleen, Janice had been his practice subject, his training dummy. She endured beatings, whippings, isolation, all under the illusion that it was for love. Cameron promised her, "If you let me get a slave, I'll stop hurting you. So she agreed. She even helped lure Colleen in. Now she watched as the torture passed to another woman and convinced herself it was better this way. The company. To ensure Colleen never escaped, Cameron invented an elaborate myth. He said she was now owned by the company, a secret underground organization that monitored and punished runaway slaves. They had agents in every state. They watched her family. They would burn her alive if she disobeyed. He forged documents, fake contracts, ID cards, rules, even a handbook. He staged phone calls where he pretended to speak to company officials. Colleen believed him, completely. Years later, she'd say, "He didn't just imprison my body, he took my mind. And once he had that, he didn't need chains." Rules of obedience. Cameron laid out strict daily rules. Silence during confinement, permission required for speech. No eye contact unless granted, punishment for disobedience. Sometimes hours in stress positions or no food for days. He rewarded good behavior by letting her out to eat at the table, like a pet. Once he took her into the living room and let her watch television. She cried, not because of what she saw, but because he was kind that day. That was how broken she'd become. Visits from family. In 1978, just 1 year after her abduction, Cameron allowed Colleen to visit her family. She was clean, quiet, and trained. He coached her. Say you're in love. Say you're traveling. Smile. Stay in character. And she did. She hugged her mother, told her she was fine, laughed at the dinner table. Her family noticed something was off. She was thin, nervous, overly obedient. But Colleen reassured them, said she was happy, said she had a boyfriend who was spiritual. They believed her, because no one wants to imagine their daughter is being kept in a box. A wedding invitation. In 1980, Colleen was still imprisoned. By then, 3 years in. Cameron had become more comfortable. He took her to public places, let her sit in the back seat, head down. He even considered marrying her under false papers, presenting her as his second wife in a religious ceremony. Janice agreed, but Colleen still wore a collar, still had to ask permission to go to the bathroom, still spent most days in the box, listening to footsteps above. She was so conditioned that she stopped trying to escape, even when doors were unlocked. Breaking points. Occasionally, cracks showed in Cameron's control. Colleen would ask questions, push boundaries, cry when he wasn't around. Once, when Cameron was away for work, Janice brought her soup and said, "He used to do this to me too. It's better when you just follow the rules." Colleen stared at her. The woman who had helped kidnap her was also a prisoner. And in that moment, she saw something terrifying. Two people can be victims and monsters at the same time. Seeds of doubt. By 1982, Cameron was escalating again, building more devices, fantasizing about acquiring more women. Colleen had become part of the furniture, predictable, controlled. But Janice began to resent it. She had kept her promise. Cameron had stopped hurting her. But now he had something better. Obedience without emotion. Janice wasn't Cameron's lover anymore. She was just another shadow in his delusion. She began reading the Bible again. And one night, quietly, she went down to Colleen's box and whispered, "Do you still believe in God?" Colleen didn't answer, but her eyes were wet. The tension builds. That year, Cameron told Janice he wanted a second slave. He said he was going to build a larger box, take another girl, and train Colleen to help break her in. Janice said nothing, but something inside her snapped. She realized, if she didn't stop him now, it would never stop. She would be buried with his secrets. She began keeping notes. And finally, in August 1984, after 7 years of silence, she took Colleen aside and whispered, You're not owned. There is no company. You can leave. Right now. August 1984, Red Bluff, California, the day Janice whispered the truth. That there was no company. No agents watching. No death squads waiting for disobedience. Colleen didn't move. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She just blinked. Because the lie had become her reality. She had spent 7 years inside a world of fear so complete, even freedom felt like a trick. Janice put a hand on her shoulder. I'm telling you the truth. You're free. You can go. Colleen whispered back, Can I call my dad first? A dismantled mind, even with the revelation, Colleen didn't escape that night. She went back into the box, willingly. The conditioning had run so deep that the truth didn't erase her fear. It shook her foundation. In her mind, escape could still trigger punishment. She feared being vaporized, hunted, destroyed. The company wasn't just a story, Cameron told her. It was a living structure in her psyche, built brick by brick over 2,600 days. Janice, sensing Colleen's paralysis, made a decision. She called Cameron's work and said he was needed at home. Then she turned to Colleen and said, Tomorrow, we end this. The call on August 9th, 1984. Janice drove Colleen to a payphone outside a bus station. Colleen stood trembling, holding a quarter in her hand like it weighed 100 pounds. She dialed her father's number. It rang twice. Then, a familiar voice. Hello? She froze. Tears welled up. Hi, Dad. It's me, Colleen. I'm coming home. Her father choked. There was a pause. Then, Oh my God. Are you okay? Where have you been? Colleen, are you okay? She couldn't answer. She just cried. The train ride Janice paid for the ticket, gave her a sweater. And for the first time in 7 years, Colleen boarded a train. Alone. She sat by the window, watching trees rush by like a dream. She hadn't seen this much open sky in years. When the conductor asked for her ticket, she flinched, expecting punishment for speaking. Instead, he smiled, took the ticket, walked on. She realized she really was free. But what haunted her wasn't the abuse. It was how compliant she had become. I never thought of myself as weak, she would later say. But I didn't try to escape. I never fought him. That guilt ate me alive. Home again. Her parents met her at the station. Her father cried harder than she'd ever seen. Her mother hugged her so tightly, she nearly lost her breath. Colleen didn't tell them everything at first. She said she'd been in a bad relationship, that she'd been isolated. She didn't want to ruin their reunion with horrors they couldn't understand. That night, she sat at the edge of her childhood bed, surrounded by posters and old books, and whispered, I'm real. I'm not a slave. I'm not Kay. I'm Colleen Stan. I made it. But she barely slept, because she knew the truth still wasn't out. Janice turns. 2 days later, Janice walked into the Red Bluff Police Department. She told the front desk officer, I have a confession. Detectives sat her down and turned on the recorder. Over the next 5 hours, she laid it all out. How she and Cameron abducted Colleen, how Colleen lived in the box under their bed for 7 years. How Cameron created a fake company to control her, how she helped conceal it all, and now wanted to stop it. It was evil, she said. He wanted to do it again. I couldn't be part of that. Detectives were stunned. They had never heard anything like this. The arrest Cameron Hooker was arrested at work without incident. He didn't resist. He didn't even ask why. When they read him his rights, he smirked. But inside his Red Bluff home, officers found the box, the slave contract. Homemade devices, including whips, clamps, a stretching rack, drawings of future plans for underground holding cells, photos of Colleen, naked, bound, gagged, filed in folders. It wasn't just abduction. It was a lifestyle, a belief system, a perverse theology of control and dominance. The box on display. The most horrifying evidence was the box itself. The press dubbed it the coffin box. Reporters lined up outside the evidence facility to get a look. 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, 1 foot tall, no light. Carpet interior, a narrow breathing hole, screws at each edge. Photos of it went viral across the country, appearing in Time, Newsweek, Rolling Stone. People couldn't believe someone could survive inside it for even a day. Colleen survived it for 7 years. The media circus. As word spread, the story captivated the nation. The girl in the box, a real-life prisoner hidden in suburbia. Talk shows begged for interviews. Psychologists were baffled. How had she stayed so long? Why didn't she escape during family visits? Why didn't she fight back? Colleen finally gave one answer. Because when you believe the walls are electrified, it doesn't matter if the door's unlocked. The prosecution begins. Cameron Hooker was charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, false imprisonment, using threats to cause fear, torture. He pled not guilty. Janice struck a deal. Full immunity in exchange for her testimony. Many were outraged, but prosecutors needed her story. Without it, Cameron could walk free. Trauma without chains. Colleen began intensive therapy, but some wounds ran deeper than memory. She'd jump at closing doors. Panic when too much time passed in silence. Wake from nightmares with the feeling of being trapped under a bed. Her therapist told her, "What you survived wasn't just abuse. It was dehumanization. You didn't just lose freedom. You lost identity." And yet, slowly, Colleen began to reclaim her name. March 1985, Tehama County Courthouse, California. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back rows. Sketch artists sharpened their pencils. The jurors sat stiff, wide-eyed, many having never heard details so graphic, so inhuman in their lives. At the center of it all was Colleen Stan, the woman who had survived 7 years inside a box, and was now standing, hand trembling, facing her captor. On the defense bench sat Cameron Hooker, silent, clean-shaven, in a navy blue suit. He didn't look like a monster, but what he carried in his briefcase, his greatest weapon, was not a knife, or a chain, or a whip. It was a contract. Exhibit of prosecutors called it Exhibit A. It was a 4-page handwritten document titled Slave Contract. Cameron had forced Colleen to sign it in 1978, 1 year into her captivity. The terms were chilling. She agreed to lifelong servitude. She acknowledged that she was property of Master C. She would not speak unless spoken to. Any disobedience would result in torture or termination by the company. The signature at the bottom wasn't Colleen Stan. It was K. When the paper was read aloud in court, several jurors looked physically ill. One woman put her hand over her mouth. The defense argument Cameron's attorney delivered a defense that stunned the public. He claimed the entire arrangement had been consensual, that Colleen was a willing participant in a sadomasochistic lifestyle, that she enjoyed the power dynamic, that she stayed because she wanted to. He pointed to the contract. He pointed to the family visits. He even highlighted Colleen's return to the Hooker home after being freed. She came back, voluntarily, he said. Who returns to their torturer unless they consented? But the jury and the public knew what this really was, a weaponized narrative of control. Colleen testifies. Colleen took the stand. She wore a pale blouse, no makeup, hair tied back. When the prosecutor asked her to describe her time in the box, she paused for a full 7 seconds. Then she spoke. He made me believe that if I ran, my family would die. That if I screamed, I'd be punished. That I belonged to him. She told them about the company, about the beatings, about the sexual assaults, about the silence. She admitted she returned to the house after escaping, not because she wanted to, but because she was still in his psychological grip. The box was small, but the fear was bigger. Janice's turn, then, Janice Hooker took the stand. Her immunity agreement protected her from prosecution, a deal that divided public opinion. She appeared remorseful, timid, sometimes tearful. But when asked why she helped Cameron for years, she responded, "Because I was afraid of him too, and because I believed the only way to stop him was to help him, until I couldn't anymore." She admitted to watching abuse, to helping clean evidence, to turning away when Colleen begged with her eyes. But she also told the court about the plan, how Cameron wanted a second slave, a basement dungeon, a future filled with more victims. And that's when the jury truly understood. Colleen wasn't the end. She was the beginning of something far worse. Cameron's notes. Among the evidence were journals. In Cameron's handwriting, they described fantasies of multiple women chained in cages. He wrote about building an underground lair. He described punishment routines, testing devices on mannequins, and conditioning protocols. He referred to Colleen only as Kay. In one passage, he wrote, "Kay is adapting well. Breaking her will is like carving wet clay. The company fiction works. Must explore more elaborate deception methods." The jury looked horrified. Even his fantasies were logistical. The psychologists. 2 expert witnesses were brought in. One explained coercive control, how captors can create dependency through isolation, fear, and manipulation. The other described Stockholm Syndrome, and how victims often develop loyalty to abusers as a survival mechanism. They both agreed. Colleen's behavior wasn't consent. It was survival. She hadn't fallen under his spell. She'd been trapped in a reality he created. The jury decides, after a month-long trial, the jury took just 1 day to deliberate. They returned with the verdict. Guilty of kidnapping, guilty of sexual assault, guilty of torture, guilty of false imprisonment, guilty on all counts. Cameron Hooker was sentenced to 104 years in prison. He showed no emotion. Colleen sat in the gallery, hands clenched, tears silently falling. The box was gone. But the shadows would take longer to fade. The aftermath, Cameron was sent to Folsom State Prison. Janice changed her name and vanished into civilian life. Colleen? She started over. She took therapy, spoke at women's shelters, even studied accounting. She got a job, found her smile again, wrote her story. And each year, on August 9th, she lights a candle. For the first day, she remembered who she was. They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. Late 1985, Chico, California Colleen Stan, walked through the automatic doors of a grocery store and froze. Just inside the entrance, a toddler threw a tantrum. He screamed, high-pitched, panicked. For a split second, she wasn't in a store. She was back in the basement, trapped beneath the waterbed, hearing Cameron's boots on the floor above, hearing herself scream. Colleen dropped her basket and ran, because even though the chains were gone, the cage was still inside her. Freedom's strain. Everyone thought the trial had ended the nightmare, but for Colleen, the hardest part came afterward. The world had moved on. There were no more front-page headlines, no reporters at her door, no therapy paid for by the state. She was left to rebuild a life she hadn't lived for 7 years. She'd missed her 21st birthday, the end of disco, her sister's wedding, the death of her grandfather, half of her own adulthood, and now, with no degree, no job history, and no roadmap, she had to start over. It was like waking up from a coma, she later said, except the coma was made of fear, and I remembered every second. Trigger's freedom didn't erase the damage. It magnified it. Colleen developed intense post-traumatic stress disorder. She couldn't sleep in a dark room. Closed spaces made her hyperventilate. She flinched when men walked too close, avoided basements, hated anything with straps or locks. But the worst triggers weren't violent. They were quiet. The ticking of a wall clock, a drawer being closed too softly, the creak of wood at night. These weren't just sounds. They were memories. The box revisited. A year after the sentencing, Colleen did something unimaginable. She returned to the evidence warehouse and asked to see the box. The officer hesitated. "You don't have to do this," he told her. Colleen nodded. "I need to remember that I'm bigger than it now." They walked her in. It sat on a metal table under harsh fluorescent light. Smaller than she remembered, but still terrifying. She crouched beside it, ran her fingers along the rim, then she whispered, "You don't own me anymore," and walked out. Trying to heal, Colleen moved to Chico, got a small apartment, enrolled in night classes. She studied accounting, something structured, something logical. Numbers made sense. People didn't. She worked a receptionist job during the day and avoided questions. No one knew her past unless they Googled her name, and she rarely gave it in full. Therapy helped. Not immediately. Not perfectly. Some sessions were silent. Others were sobs. Sometimes she screamed, but one breakthrough came unexpectedly. Her therapist asked, "What made you survive?" Colleen paused, then said, "Because I knew I was real, even when he said I wasn't." Letters from prison. In 1986, Cameron Hooker tried to write her from prison. The letter arrived in a plain envelope, addressed to a P.O. box her lawyer had kept. Inside, 6 pages of looping handwriting. It began, "To Kay, I hope you can forgive me." She didn't read past that line. She burned it in a metal trash bin, then called her therapist and said, "I need to tell my story now. My way." The book deal Colleen began working with a journalist. She gave hours of interviews, painful, exhaustive, emotionally draining. She described the early days, the box, the company, the contract, the trips out in public where no one knew she was a prisoner. She confessed her guilt, her compliance, her survival. The journalist asked if she wanted to change anything. She said no. "Don't make me a hero. Don't make him a monster in the movies. Just tell it exactly how it was." The book would eventually become The Simple Gifts of Life, and later inspire documentaries, podcasts, even movies. But Colleen never watched the films. That girl in the box, that's not who I am anymore. Facing the public. As the media revived interest in her story, Colleen was offered talk shows, panel interviews, even reality show spots. She declined most. She preferred speaking at shelters, schools, and trauma centers, places where her story could protect someone else. She told survivors, "You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose next." That message struck, because Colleen was living proof of it. Reconnecting years past, Colleen reconnected with family. Her father never asked for details. He just held her hand when she got quiet. Her younger sister, now a mother of 2, invited Colleen to be godmother to her daughter. On the day of the baptism, Colleen held the baby in her arms and thought, "She'll never know what it's like to live in a box." And that was enough. A new love. In the early 90s, Colleen met a man at a small community event. He was kind, gentle, never pried. They started dating, slowly. She told him the story on their 3rd month together. He didn't flinch. He said, "Thank you for surviving." They eventually married, quietly, privately. Not because Colleen wanted to hide, but because the world already knew her trauma. She wanted to keep her peace just for herself. Still here. By 1995, Colleen was 38. She owned a car. She had a dog. She smiled often. The nightmares still came. The panic attacks didn't vanish, but they no longer ruled her. One evening, she sat at the edge of a lake, the wind picking up across the surface. She pulled out a notebook and wrote, "He made me believe I was nothing, but I came back whole. I am the girl in the box, but I'm not in it anymore." 1973, Red Bluff, California. Before there was a box, before Colleen Stan ever raised her thumb on the highway, there was Janice Lashley, a high school junior, quiet, soft-spoken, raised in a deeply religious home where obedience was the currency of love. She met Cameron Hooker in her senior year. He was older, charismatic, and had a knack for knowing what people wanted to hear. He told Janice she was beautiful, but only when she obeyed. She mistook it for affection. And just like Colleen years later, Janice stepped into a world she didn't understand, groomed for silence. Cameron didn't need chains to control Janice. He used shame, scripture, and punishment disguised as intimacy. He told her God wanted wives to submit. That pain was proof of devotion, that suffering was love's highest form. At first, she resisted. Then he began introducing games, blindfolds, cuffs, silent nights spent naked in closets. He called it training. And slowly, Janice disappeared. Not physically, but spiritually. The first box, by 1975, Janice had become Cameron's test subject. He built his first box in the garage, a prototype. He placed her inside, timed her breathing, measured how long she could stay silent in darkness. When she cried, he scolded her. A real slave wouldn't make noise, he said. Janice was 20. Cameron promised, "One day I'll find a real one, then you'll be free." She believed him. The deal. In 1976, Cameron made his pitch. He said he needed a permanent submissive, someone they could own, someone who would replace Janice in his darker fantasies. He swore it wouldn't be about sex. Janice agreed, under 3 conditions: no intercourse with the slave, no children involved, no killing. Cameron promised all 3. It was the beginning of the trap that would catch Colleen Stan, and it was the final compromise Janice made before surrendering her morality: living with a ghost. Once Colleen was abducted, Janice felt 2 things: relief, that Cameron would stop hurting her; guilt, that another woman now suffered in her place. For the first few weeks, Janice avoided the basement, but she heard Colleen's muffled cries through the vents. Sometimes she stood at the bedroom door, hand on the knob, unable to enter. Cameron would come up smiling. "She's adapting," he'd say. "We're making progress." Janice would nod, numb. Complicity over time, Janice stopped resisting. She brought Colleen food. She helped clean wounds. She kept secrets when neighbors asked about strange noises. At night, she sat on the bed above the box and tried not to think. But Colleen was always there, just inches below, breathing in the dark. It was like living on top of a grave, she later confessed, but one you helped dig. The turning point. It wasn't Cameron's violence that broke Janice. It was his ambition. By 1983, he started talking about a second slave, a new girl, a child maybe. He wanted Colleen to help train her. He started building new boxes. That was the line Janice couldn't cross. The guilt, long buried, began to surface. She went to church again, prayed, fasted, and finally, in 1984, she went to Colleen, whispered the truth, and broke the spell. The confession. After Colleen's escape, Janice drove herself to the Red Bluff Police Department. She wore a gray sweater and brought a handwritten confession. Detectives were skeptical until they read the words. Her name is Colleen Stan. She was held under our bed for 7 years. My husband made her believe she was owned by a secret company. I helped him. I'm ready to tell you everything." The tape rolled for hours. She detailed the abduction, the conditioning, the sex acts, the contract, the fabricated company. She cried, apologized, asked for forgiveness, the immunity deal. The prosecution faced a moral dilemma. They needed Janice's testimony to convict Cameron, but that meant giving her immunity. Public outrage was immediate. She was part of it. She's just as guilty. But legally, the DA had no choice. Without Janice, it would be Colleen's word against Cameron's, and the jury might believe the defense's consensual narrative. So Janice walked free. A woman who'd helped imprison another for 7 years became the key to setting her free. Disappearance. After the trial, Janice vanished. She changed her name, left Red Bluff. No interviews, no book deal, no memoir. Some say she moved to Oregon. Others say she remarried. Colleen never saw her again, and never wanted to. "She may have saved me," Colleen once said, "but she also let it happen. That's something I can't forget." A legacy of Gray Janice Hooker remains one of the most controversial figures in true crime history. Was she a victim? An accomplice? Both? The answer isn't clean. Because real evil often wears plain clothes, and sometimes monsters share a bed with people who choose not to see them. 1981, Red Bluff, California. Colleen stood at a payphone outside a gas station, coins in hand, a scrap of paper with her parents' number trembling between her fingers. It had been 4 years since she'd last heard their voices. Behind her, Cameron waited in the car. He had allowed this, a favor, a reward. 5 minutes, he said, and only the script. Colleen nodded. She was conditioned now, trained. The punishment for improvisation had been made clear. She dialed. Her mother answered. "Colleen? Oh my God, is that really you?" Colleen smiled into the receiver. "Hi, Mom. I'm okay, just traveling." Every word was monitored, not by a wire, but by something more insidious. Fear. The illusion of freedom. By 1981, Colleen had been a captive for 4 years. Cameron had loosened the leash. He let her go on errands, made her garden, even allowed her to visit her family, under strict instruction. She was no longer kept in the box daily, just most nights. To the outside world, she was a quiet girlfriend, a house guest, a traveler. To her family, she seemed odd, thinner, nervous, but not enslaved. She never told them, not one word. Because the company was always watching, she would later explain. No, even the sky had eyes. The visit. Her family was elated. She stayed for a full 24 hours, ate home-cooked food, slept in her old bed. But she also refused to answer direct questions about her boyfriend. Became visibly anxious around phones, looked to the window every 5 minutes, flinched when a neighbor's dog barked. Her parents sensed something was off, but chalked it up to California life, or maybe some kind of cult. They didn't push. They didn't know they had 48 hours with their daughter before she chose to return to captivity. The return Colleen went back, voluntarily, got into Cameron's car, sat quietly. He praised her obedience, gave her a new set of rules, let her out of the box for a full week. To him, she was the perfect slave now, docile, broken, loyal. To her, she was protecting her family from company retaliation. The truth was, she'd never really been free. The mind's cage experts later called it coercive persuasion. Others called it invisible prison syndrome. Colleen had been isolated, starved of information, and subjected to threats so elaborate and constant that her ability to think freely had been disabled. This wasn't weakness. This was systematic psychological dismantling. She couldn't tell right from wrong, couldn't trust her instincts. Even when not chained, she behaved like she was. "The cage isn't made of metal," she said. "It's made of fear. The church phase. In 1982, Cameron had another idea. He wanted to convert Colleen. He began taking her to church with him and Janice. To the congregation, she was shy, polite. To Cameron, it was a test. Could he control her in public? The answer was yes. She followed every instruction, spoke only when spoken to, sat when told, even smiled. The congregation had no idea she went home each night and slept in a box under their marital bed. The second slave. But control wasn't enough for Cameron. He wanted more. He began crafting a second, larger box in the garage. He made diagrams, wrote plans. He fantasized about abducting a second girl, perhaps younger, maybe two at once. He even considered training Colleen to help break them in. That's when Janice finally began to unravel. Not from guilt, but from the realization he would never stop. A fragile rebellion. Janice confronted Cameron. You said just one. You said Colleen would be enough. Cameron shrugged. She's trained now. It's time for the next. Janice snapped. She stopped helping, stopped feeding Colleen, refused to assist with new builds, began secretly journaling. Her silence was breaking. The last lock, one night in late 1983, Colleen sat across from Cameron at the dinner table. He asked her, "Do you love your master?" Colleen nodded. "Yes." "Do you want to stay?" Another nod. But inside, her belief was crumbling. Doubt had started to seep in. Whispers of rebellion, visions of what life used to be. When Janice found her crying later that night, she didn't ignore it. She knelt beside her and whispered, "What if I told you the company isn't real?" Colleen shook her head. "They'll hurt my family." Janice's voice was steady. "Number they won't, because they don't exist." That was the first time Colleen didn't believe Cameron. The real world, again. In early 1984, Cameron left town for a weekend job. Janice gave Colleen a small allowance, told her, "Go, take a walk, breathe." Colleen walked downtown. No chains, no headbox, just the wind in her hair. She stopped at a bakery, bought herself a roll, sat alone and ate it. It was the first thing she had ever purchased for herself in 7 years, and for the first time she thought, "I could leave." The exit plan Janice began planning. Not an escape, a reveal. She would confess everything, tell Colleen the full truth, help her contact her family, and then go to the police. Colleen hesitated, still afraid it was a test. But something in Janice's eyes had changed. The hollow, obedient wife was gone. In her place was a woman ready to burn the house down. Early 1984, Red Bluff, California. Colleen. Stan stood in the bathroom, toothbrush in hand, staring at her reflection. Her skin was pale, her cheekbones pronounced, her eyes tired. But behind the dull haze of trauma, something had begun to stir. Clarity. The cracks in the company's mythology had widened. Janice's whispered confessions echoed louder with each passing day. There is no company. Could it be true? Could this whole nightmare, the threats, the contracts, the fear, have been a lie carefully constructed by a monster with a toolbox and too much time? She rinsed her mouth and dried her face. It was time to find out. The tipping point, Janice was changing too. Once complicit, now she was decisive, focused. She had stopped sleeping beside Cameron. She no longer obeyed his casual commands. She spent hours reading scripture in the living room, highlighting lines about redemption and justice. Cameron didn't notice. He was too busy sketching plans for his next slave containment box, a steel-reinforced coffin buried beneath the workshop. He told Colleen she would help train the new girl. That was the moment Colleen realized, if I didn't escape, I would eventually become him. A secret pact. In March 1984, Janice and Colleen sat in the kitchen. The air was still. The walls felt tighter than ever. Janice leaned forward and whispered, "I'll get you out, but you have to promise. You won't tell anyone I helped." Colleen hesitated. After everything, Janice wanted immunity? Still, she agreed, because she knew escape was the only path left. The following day, Janice called a bus line. She bought a one-way ticket. Then she picked up the phone and called Colleen's family. "She's alive. She's coming home." The last lie, Cameron came home 2 days later, unaware of what had been set in motion. He kissed Janice, complimented her cooking. He told Colleen she looked obedient lately. She nodded, smiled, played along. Inside, she was counting the hours. She packed what little she owned: a blouse, a photo from childhood, a torn paperback. She didn't take the slave contract, or the collar, or the gag. "Those things didn't belong to me," she later said. "They belonged to my captivity." The escape on August 9th, 1984. Janice drove Colleen to a Greyhound station. They said nothing on the ride. The sun was setting, orange streaks cutting through the windshield. When they arrived, Janice handed her a small envelope with $20 inside. "This is all I have. I hope it's enough." Colleen hugged her. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close to closure. She boarded the bus and didn't look back. The revelation 2 days later, Janice made the call. She walked into the police station and said the words that would unravel everything. "My husband kidnapped a woman and held her for 7 years. I helped, but I can't live with it anymore." Detectives thought it was a prank. Then she showed them photos, diagrams, journal entries. They asked if the victim was still alive. Janice smiled faintly. "She's already gone. She escaped." The arrest: Cameron Hooker was arrested at work on August 14th, 1984. His co-workers were stunned. He'd always seemed quiet, a little odd, but not dangerous. He asked for a lawyer, said nothing to police. But in the evidence locker, detectives found the box, the slave contract, dozens of Polaroids, homemade bondage gear, and most chilling, plans for a second victim. Cameron wasn't just a sadist. He was an architect of horror, Janice's bargain. Janice agreed to testify in full in exchange for complete immunity. The DA had no choice. Without her, the case rested on one woman's word against her captors. With her, they had the entire blueprint. The deal was struck. The public was furious. She helped him for years, and now she walks free. But in the end, Janice would be the match that burned Cameron's house of lies to the ground. Colleen returns. When Colleen reunited with her family, it wasn't a celebration. It was a quiet, emotional reckoning. Her father wept when he saw her. Her mother held her for nearly 5 minutes straight. Colleen didn't explain everything. Not yet. She needed time to feel human again. But she whispered one thing that night as she stood in her childhood bedroom. "I'm home. I'm not Kay. I'm Colleen." And for the first time in years, she slept without fear. The price of survival. The days after the escape were not easy. Colleen battled nightmares, panic attacks, sudden waves of guilt. Sometimes she'd wake up and instinctively ask for permission to use the bathroom. Other times she'd flinch when someone said her name too harshly. "People think escaping is the end," she said. "But really, it's just the start." Therapists told her she'd been brainwashed, but that word never sat right. She preferred a different one: undone. A new beginning. By the time the trial was announced, Colleen had agreed to testify. She knew she'd face Cameron again. She knew the public would dissect her every decision, but she also knew one thing: if I didn't speak, he'd do it again. And the next girl might not survive. The girl who once lived in a box was now preparing to stand in front of a courtroom and tell the world exactly what happened inside it. September 1985, Tehama County Superior Court, California. The courthouse buzzed like a hornet's nest. Local reporters jockeyed for seats. National outlets flew in crews. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the woman who had lived in a box and the man who put her there. The defendant, Cameron Hooker, 31, looking eerily normal in a blue blazer, clean-cut, emotionless. The victim, Colleen Stan, 28, visibly aged by trauma but unbroken. The charge sheet was long and horrifying. Kidnapping, sexual assault, false imprisonment, use of a deadly weapon during the commission of a felony, and more. The prosecution called it one of the most shocking cases of prolonged captivity in modern American history. The defense called it consensual. The opening salvo. The prosecutor, Stephen Carlton, opened with a brutal statement. For 7 years, Colleen Stan was not a girlfriend. She was not a tenant. She was a slave. And the man who made her that way is sitting right there. He held up a photograph. The box, 6 feet long, 2 feet high, screws around the edges, padded with old carpet. Then came the second image, a copy of the slave contract. The courtroom gasped. The defense strategy Cameron's attorney, Michael Warfield, struck a wildly different tone. He argued that Colleen was a willing participant in a non-traditional relationship, that the box was a consensual prop, that the contract, signed by Colleen as Kay, was part of an elaborate BDSM lifestyle. This was not a crime, Warfield insisted. This was a mutual arrangement between adults with unorthodox preferences. The jurors looked unconvinced. So did the judge. Colleen takes the stand. On the 4th day, Colleen Stan walked to the witness box. The room went silent. She spoke softly but firmly. She told the jury about the abduction in 1977 while hitchhiking. The first night in the box, the fake company Cameron invented to control her years of rape, silence, and psychological destruction. The gag, the collar, the weekly beatings, the years in the coffin-sized box under the bed, the belief that her family would be murdered if she disobeyed. She cried only once, when describing the moment she saw her parents during her brief 1981 visit and couldn't tell them the truth. "I wanted to scream," she said, "but I believed they would die if I did." Exhibit after exhibit. The prosecution laid out the horror in methodical order. The padded box, brought into the courtroom for the jury to see the contracts. The head restraint device, the collar labeled K drawings. Cameron made of future slave chambers, handwritten notes where he logged punishments and obedience scores. A diagram titled, "How to Break a Mind." It wasn't just cruelty, it was a philosophy. Janice testifies. Then came Janice Hooker, Cameron's wife and former accomplice. Granted full immunity, she took the stand for nearly 8 hours over 2 days. She testified that she helped Cameron build the box. She agreed to him having a slave so he would stop abusing her. She believed it would be non-sexual, but was soon proven wrong. She watched Cameron torture Colleen and did nothing. She helped feed, dress, and conceal Colleen. Cameron planned to kidnap more women. And finally, she found God and realized what they'd done was evil. The courtroom was stunned. Janice's voice cracked only once, when she said, "I let it happen. Every day. And I told myself that not being the one doing it made me innocent. I was wrong." The defense pushes back. Warfield cross-examined Colleen aggressively. He pointed to her 1981 visit to her family. Why didn't she run then? Her return to the Hookers afterward. Wasn't that consent? The fact that she called Cameron sir and obeyed him in public. But Colleen stood firm. When someone builds a world around you, where escape equals death, you don't think, you survive. I believed the company was real. Warfield pressed her on why she never tried to scream in public. She answered, "Because to scream meant signing my parents' death warrant. That's how real it was to me." The experts, Wei and the prosecution, brought in trauma specialists and psychologists. They explained coercive control, how abusers use fear, isolation, and lies to create a prison in the mind, Stockholm Syndrome. The survival mechanism where victims begin identifying with captors. Learned helplessness, how repeated abuse conditions victims to believe escape is impossible. One expert summed it up perfectly. Colleen Stan wasn't in a box for 7 years. She was in a system, a psychological machine built to erase her autonomy. The jury deliberates. After 33 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 24 hours. The verdict came swift and sharp. Guilty of kidnapping, guilty of sexual assault, guilty of false imprisonment, guilty of using a deadly weapon, guilty on all major counts. Cameron Hooker was sentenced to 104 years in prison, effectively life. He showed no emotion. Colleen cried softly in the back row. The box was gone, but the damage had a name now: the aftershock. The media dubbed it the girl in the box case. Colleen became both a symbol of survival and a subject of brutal scrutiny.